Disclaimer. Please forgive me now for there may be mispronunciations in this video. A dark urban legend comes from Maryland, and she is known as Black Aggie. Black Aggie is a cemetery sculpture that depicts a woman seated and draped in a shroud, with her head bowed. There are quite a few stories about her, from her being a creepy statue erected as a cruel joke by a husband who had killed his wife, or at least treated her so badly that she lost her will to live. Some say that the statue was a typical Victorian cemetery art and dedicated to a well-loved wife, but it was also haunted because of disrespectful visitors that disturbed the spirit of the woman. There are even a few who said that the statue was made for a black woman who was murdered by white men. What happens when you visit her? Well, it is said that if you sit on her lap, she would wrap her arms around you and crush you to death or stab you. If you sit on her lap at midnight, you will meet your end within 2 weeks. If you stare at her face, her eyes would start to glow from red to even green and strike you blind. Pregnant women would miscarry. Unmarried women would become pregnant. People's hearts would stop at the very sight of her by moonlight. And supposedly, no grass would grow on the ground where the statue's shadow would lie during the day. At night, sometimes the statue would animate and physically move around. I couldn't find any actual real occurrences of these events happening, and I'm sure they would be announced if it did. But it doesn't come to a surprise that fraternities would haze their pledges with a visit to Black Aggie. However, the actual history of the dark statue is interesting in itself. After the Civil War, rising star of the Union Army, General Felix Agnes married Annie Fulton, a nurse who tended to his wounds during the war. The couple moved into her hometown of Baltimore. His military record won him a successful government career. He would retire and take over as publisher of his father-in-law's newspaper, the Baltimore American. In 1905, at the age of 65, Felix purchased a bronze statue called Grief from a local artist named Edward Posh. He installed it at the family plot he had bought at the Druid Ridge Cemetery. Sadly, the first person buried in the shadow of the dark statue was his mother. After a year passed, the widow of the famous sculptor Augusta St. Gaudens accused Felix of being a barbarian for so poorly copying her husband's work. Felix was indignant at the accusation, but discovered the woman was right. His statue was an unauthorized casting of a famous statue by Augusta St. Gaudens, which stood in Washington, D.C.'s Rock Creek Cemetery. This statue had been made 20 years earlier for Henry Adams, the grandson of John Quincy Adams, to commemorate his wife, Marion Adams, who had poisoned herself during a bout of depression. The statue stood near Marion's plot, but it was unmarked. Henry never spoke about the statue or his beloved wife. Felix sued the sculptor Posh, who had advertised the statue as an original work. Felix did win the lawsuit, but he chose to keep the statue where it was. Within 20 years, Felix and Annie Agnes were buried in the shadow of the statue, and sometime later the legends began. In 1967, after countless cases of vandalism and disturbances, the statue was removed from the cemetery and donated to the Smithsonian Institution. She went missing for decades, but has resurfaced. She is now in the courtyard of the Dolly Madison House in Federal Courts Complex, at the center of Madison and H Streets near the White House. So is the statue really haunted? Does it really come to life? I say it's just an urban legend, but what do you think?